a radiogenic production.
Hello, Mark Quinn here again. My time working in local radio in Bray from the late 1970s to the 1990s centred on my passion for interviewing, whether recorded or live. I got to speak with many, many people, all sharing stories or supporting Bray area causes. I suppose I'm fortunate to have kept many reel-to-reel and cassette recordings, which now, thanks to modern audio restoration, we are able to enhance so that we can hear these voices from the past once more. This podcast series largely draws from BLB, or Bray Local Broadcasting, and Horizon Radio, and centres around interviews mostly from the late 1980s and into the early 1990s. I was really lucky to have some great people around me, such as sound mixer Chris Conway and particularly researcher and producer Elaine Keogh, who managed to source some great guests for me to chat with live on Saturday mornings. Together, our team produced over 50 one-hour episodes of Quinn & Company between 1989 and 1991, and our work was honoured with a 1990 Bray Chamber of Commerce Endeavour Award, a recognition that I still value deeply. So, as we travel back in time, I hope you enjoy listening to these archive interviews. My guest in this episode is a man whose name is woven into the very fabric of civic and sporting life in our town of Bray, and that's Joe Loughman. If you've ever been involved in a community group in Bray, you've likely come across Joe's legacy. He was a man of boundless energy and a true pillar of the community, dedicating his life to making the town a better place to live. To sports fans, he's perhaps best known as a foundational figure in the Bray Wheelers Cycling Club. In fact, back in 1958, Joe personally devised the Shay Elliott, a gruelling single-day race taking in the toughest terrain in County Wicklow and that remains a premier event in the Irish cycling calendar to this day. Beyond sport, Joe was a pioneering heritage champion. With Christy Brien, he spent years preserving local folklore and history, eventually becoming a familiar presence at the Bray Heritage Centre in the old courthouse before its closure. This conversation explores his life, offering a nostalgic look at Old Bray and the many local organisations he helped to establish. Joe Loughman, Role 4, interview on the 15th of July 1987. From the BLB archive, here's my conversation with Joe Loughman.
I was born in 1925 in Little Bray, Upper Dargle Road, little lodge bordering on the edge of Palermo Estate. It was then a big estate with one big manor house, if you like, and 3 or 4 lodges around the perimeter. Our lodge was overlooked the whole of the Little Bray Valley.
And what do you remember most about those early days?
I remember the fact that there was 55 steps from the Upper Dargle Road, granite steps up to my house. And, you know, that had a big influence on my whole life because, first of all, we were in a very elevated position, overlooking the whole of the Little Bray Valley. We were the only house on that whole area, little small lodge, overlooking the whole. And it gave you a great air of importance, overlooking, as somebody, a person made the remark, overlooking the 32 counties, because it was a panoramic view of the whole of the Wicklow Hills, the very minute you looked out. And then below you, immediately below you, was Little Bray, and these 55 granite steps took you from complete peace and tranquility down into the maddening crowd of Little Bray, which it was more or less at that time, you know.
There's always been a rivalry, if I can call it a rivalry, between people from Big Bray and people from Little Bray, especially among young lads. Was that rivalry there when you were a young lad?
It wasn't a rivalry so much as it was a different. There were different classes. You had mostly artisans living in Little Bray, and artisan families. who were all the working class people, marvellous people to live amongst, like like the Liberties and that sort of the esprit de corps amongst them all was really fabulous, and they would do anything for each other, and they helped each other, and still do. That still exists down there. Now you had the other side of the town across the bridge, which is called Big Bray, was more of the people who were not necessarily landed gentry, but they were all moneyed people who owned big hotels, business people, people who were there to make money, and they didn't care how they did it. Whereas the Little Bray people were people who respected an awful lot of the good things in life,
What did your father do?
He was a postman, and I remember the early years. My mother worked very hard as well. She was a great cook and went out to cook in various big houses in the area, particularly for the priests. So when the priests at the time always had great banquets and hosted judges and the nobility of the time, had these banquets maybe once a month or whatever it might be, and these dinners that they had, my mother used to go in and she had her own specialities for these functions. And I remember the spin-off from these was the fact that we used to get great treats from these functions. We'd wait for Mum to come home, because we were rather poor, really, when it was all boiled down, as were everybody else, and an awful lot of poverty in the area at the time. We're talking about the 20s and 30s, very little work, and an awful lot of TB rampant in every family. When I say that, there wasn't a house that didn't have somebody suffering from consumption,
Did it affect your household?
Didn't, no. And simply, I think the reason for that was the fact that we were away from all this in our own little island. Maybe it was the spin-off from all these banquets, of course, fortified us. And also the fact that my mother was a fabulous good cook, and hygiene was very important to her, Although, believe it or not, we'd no running water in the house and no toilets.
And how did you manage?
We had a pipe supposed to carry in water, a lead pipe carrying up those 55 steps, and the water pressure was never sufficient, very rarely sufficient to force the water up those pipes up to where we lived. This is the housing estate, which is now Palermo. It was built on since. The water would come, maybe you'd get some water, but generally you had to go down to the bottom of these steps with a bucket of water and bucket the whole thing up, to carry it up. But as I said, these steps had a marked influence on all our family. We were always very fleet of foot because of these steps. We were little hares when it came to it. All the sports we ran away with all the sports in school. 100 yards, 220 yards. Nobody could touch us. And I often advocate that anybody who's doing any training for running, go and live in a place where there's plenty of steps, because up to quite recently, I could beat any of the family up our stairs running. No bother at all. And I'm a small little fella, It was amazing the effect that those steps had. And as it proved afterwards too, it was an advantage in cycling as well, There was a trainer called Carruthers in Australia, and he advocated something similar, and he was responsible for training John Landy, who was a 4-minute miler, and all these fellas. And any time I saw his remarks about this sort of thing, I think back to our own youth. But these steps up to, and of course it was the steps in the area were known as Loughman steps, and your pals were highly privileged to come up and come into that, because it was a private property and private land, and only we decided who came into play on that area. And the early days were, I suppose we had 50 or 60 hens, free range hens running around on, and we took great delight in using their feathers to make arrows, and subsequently shooting at these hens, sticking them to the ground with arrows, bows and arrows. We were mad because of an awful lot of cowboys. The cinema was arriving in the 30s, and the cowboys and Indians had a great influence, and we all played cowboys and Indians, and we all made our own bows and arrows.
In 1932, you went to school in St. Cronan's.
Yes, my mother was very friendly with the headmaster of St. Cronan's, which was then in the Little Flower Hall. And the new school of St. Cronus was being built on the hill, and my mother was persuaded to send us to the school. Not that I ever regretted it. It was a long walk from Little Bray up to St. Cronus on the Convent Hill. But
how did you do in school?
Not well at all. Never did anything academically. Never. I didn't do anything. The only subject I was very keen on was Irish, and unfortunately, it was never fostered in the school. I had a great yen for Irish. I really took a duck to water to Irish, and yet I never learned Irish. It was extraordinary. The little bit we did learn in school, I no bother with the Irish language at all, and yet it was never nurtured in the school at all, and we never really got the tuition we would have liked to have got. Matter of fact, I learned very little in St. Cronan's. Maybe it was because I was dim-witted anyway, but I felt that I learned more in the technical school when I left St. Cronan's. I think the technical schools is one of the greatest things that influenced my life, and I could never understand the folly of why they let this thing slide. It's only now they're beginning to realise the mistake they made. And I remember when we went to school, I made some wonderful friends. For the two reasons I championed the technical schools: one was the fact they had better teachers, and secondly, it was multi-denominational. Now, that had a marked effect on me afterwards, because the friends I made in that school, in the technical school in Bray, I still have a lot of them. Now, I had never met a lot of my Church of Ireland friends until I went to that school. Although they lived in Little Bray, we never played with each other. It wasn't our idea. It might have been theirs, I'm not sure. But we certainly never became very friendly until we went to the tech, and then we became lifelong friends. And the extraordinary thing about it, years later, maybe 40 years later, those same friends I made in those technical schools, I made contact with in the formation of the Historical Society, and they were all founder members of the Historical Society, and still are members of it. Extraordinary the way it all comes together. It's one of the reasons why in later years there I was terribly interested in our Bray School project here, because it was that type of school that allowed all denominations to come together, and then you practice your own religion as you feel like it.
Do you remember your first job?
From the technical school, the first job I was sent to go to was hairdressing, and the chap who was the hairdresser at the time, a man called Mickey Napier, well known in the town at the time, he said, "Joe, I'll have a word with your mother. I don't think this is the job for you." And he talked me out of it.
And how did you feel?
I was delighted. It wasn't my scene at all. And the next offer I got was the cinema. A junior operator required in the picture house, as it was called then, McDermott's Picture House on the Quinsborough Road, where the shopping centre is now. I was sent over there with about maybe 15 or 16 other fellas for interview, but lo and behold, I got the job. I was charmed with myself, but it was a terribly difficult job, a very hard job. We started at 10 o'clock in the morning, and you'd be lucky you got home by 11:30 at night.
And what would you do at 10 o'clock in the morning?
You see, you have to understand that the operations of the cinema in those days was the program, the whole program changed every 2 days. There was a program on for Monday and Tuesday, and another program for Wednesday and Thursday, and Friday and Saturday, and Sunday was a different program. So you had all these changes, which meant the films had to be collected, and we had to go into Dublin. We'd go in at 10 o'clock in the morning. You would pick up the program which had been prepared or put in cans from the night before. You would cart that program on your back up to the bus, and then you would...
These were big spools.
Big, huge spools. They were spools. They were taken off the spools and made into reels, and they were into these metal boxes, or circular metal boxes, and they were loaded into bags like kit bags. And these were they were 5 or 6 stone, very heavy. You had to cart them up to the bus stop at the bridge there, and go into Dublin and carry them over to Middle Abbey Street to the film renters, hand them in. And then they would know. Then you would have the programs for the next 2 days. you'd have to bring them home on the same bus, the next Bray bus at least, and get home. And when you brought them back to Bray, you would then have to take them programs out of the cans, put them on spools, put 2 reels on a spool, and prepare that whole program for that day's showing. Now, it could be an afternoon showing or it could be a 6 o'clock showing, depending. And you'd have to go through every inch of that film in your fingers to make sure there was no flaws in it, because if it was made of celluloid and it was stopped for an instant in the machine, it went up in flames.
Much to the distress of the audience.
Well, you'd burn have maybe the continuity of the film would be gone, because you'd have to whip that out of the machine and throw it outside the building. But it was all celluloid, highly inflammable, and the actual part of the machine it passed down through was white hot from the arc lamps. And if it stopped for an instant, it was supposed to go through at 90 feet per minute, but if it stopped for an instant at all, woof, it was gone. You'd try and get what you could out of it, take the spool out, throw it out, and try and break it and stop it from going on fire, and then carry on. But the job was rather arduous, and I stuck it for about 2.5 years. It was a terribly uninteresting job after you learned the first year or so. It was sheer monotony.
But surely watching all those films must have been good fun.
Well, you became a terrible critic of the cinema. And you would also recognise, you can appreciate this now, you're looking at, we say, 1, 2, 3, 4 changes a week, 4 programmes going through a week. Now, you can imagine in that lot, one of them might be a good programme. The rest of them were tripe. There were horror pictures, cowboy pictures, and we say just programs that were thrown in. There could be anything, any sort of a short, which was making up a program. Once it had a 2.5 hour duration.
Joe, McDermott's wasn't the only cinema in Bray then, was it?
No, we had 3 cinemas in Bray. We had the Royal Cinema, McDermott's, and we had the Star Cinema, originally it was called, then the Roxy, and then eventually the Panorama.
So cinema was popular then?
Oh, well, you just couldn't get into the cinemas. Every change was full. I mean, you had to go earlier, you just couldn't get in.
And how much was it in?
Well, it was 4p in. It was even 2p in the front of what we call the pit. And the gallery was the next price in McDermott's. And I think it was something like, it was 4p. There was 2p in the pit, 4p in the, and then it was there was some other in the parterre, which is the cushion seats, were just a little bit extra. I think there were something in the reasons 7p or 8p or 9p or whatever.
These were the war years. Did the war affect life in Bray that much?
It certainly did, because we were all rationed. The films were very influential. Like, there was propaganda films were put out. So you'd have English propaganda films and you'd have American propaganda films, and they were designed to make the public think the way they wanted them to, you know. And then you had the newsreels, because you can appreciate there was very little. Not everybody had radios, you know. Most people had some sort of stuff, but the news bulletins weren't as we know them now. And you relied an awful lot on the cinema to give you for instance, the Pathy News was changed twice a week. It was either Pathy Gazette or it was the Government News, and these changed so much that you had to keep up abreast of what was happening by these news bulletins, you know. And they were slanted from a propaganda point of view, you know. They were all anti-German, mostly slanted, you know, because that was the common enemy.
Did you appreciate that at the time?
Funnily enough, the younger fry, they were always for action, and whoever, from school, like as you passed out of school, you began to see things in a different light, you know, and you began to see the overall picture and say, well, if these fellas are going to beat their way around Europe, they're going to come over here and beat the lard out of us as well, and we're going to be the recipient of whatever's happening over there at a later stage. And you began to take sides then and say, well, no, that's not a good thing, we better make sure it doesn't happen. I found myself thinking in that direction, you know. Although you're thinking about the British being the common enemy when you were in school, it didn't obtain during the war. There was a different attitude, because not only that, but you found, because there was no work anywhere, very little work anywhere, and I found myself thinking. I said, well, now, what do you do is you walk out of a job. There's nowhere to walk to. There's only one thing you can do. You can either join the armed forces and join the war, or you can stay where you are. And if you were in a job that you were totally disillusioned with, and you felt that you were getting nowhere, and being a young fella, you just, everybody wanted to travel.
And that was the case with you. You were a bit disillusioned.
I was disillusioned with the way I was being treated in the job. I felt I had got raw dealed on numerous occasions when I felt I should have been upgraded, and felt that I was doing a good job, and I felt myself I was doing a good job, and that I was always very dedicated to whatever I was doing.
So what did you do to get out of the job?
I decided then I'd take off. So I took off. I took off and joined the RAF.
So this was the turning point then in your life?
Very much so. Very much so. I felt that, I said, well, now, there's an opportunity here. I'm going to see life. Although it's a war situation, I'll utilise that, and I'll gain whatever education that I'd missed out prior to that. I mean, we only had the national school or the technical school, and honestly, I felt very inadequate. Although we were abreast of things, because we looked towards Europe for everything, and I felt the first thing that struck me very forcibly when I went to England. We were over in a place in Lincolnshire where the Dorniers were coming in over the North Sea, in Lincolnshire, and the 1,000 bomber raids were at a later stage were mustering, and the whole place was vibrating with this sort of situation. But the thing that struck me very forcibly was that we had a greater grip of world affairs in Ireland than the average Englishman had. Don't ask me why this was so. Maybe I put it down to the fact that they read newspapers which were of, we say, the new the Mirror type of concept, but there was no news in them worth talking about. There were a lot of flippant sort of articles in it which weren't world news as such, and we here were being fed on papers which were a very high standard of journalism. That's what I felt, when I went over there. It was the first reaction. And I remember it showed up very forcibly in discussion groups we used to have during the war. And now there was an awful influence, an Irish influence in England in the war. You wouldn't believe it. There was 19 fellas from around this area on the same drome as I was on. 19 fellas from Bray and Shankill, fellas I knew. And I met up with them, all these fellas, in the one place. And of course, the huge complexes these drones were, anything 20 square miles,
Did you like life in the air?
Oh, it was fabulous.
In the Air Force?
Absolutely fabulous. It gave me an outlet for something that I was very keen on, and that was athletics and sports. I was swimming, I was fencing, I was playing rugby, I was running. I remember running for the RAF against the Army Physical Training Corps, and I was getting tuition, and I was enjoying every inch of that. And I was very keen on gymnastics, and it meant that you had full facilities for that sort of thing. Magnificent gymnasiums. I hadn't seen anything like it before, and the facilities were absolutely superb, and it made me. I certainly enjoyed. I was always an early riser, and went out and did all sorts of training, about 6:30 in the morning. Came back and got my breakfast at 8. That type of thing. No, I don't mean jogging now. I mean just genuine training. It was a new life for me. I enjoyed every inch of it. It was fabulous.
How long were you in the Air Force then?
4 years. 4 years. 4 very productive years for me. I learned a lot. I was a changed man. I was very finicky about foods before I went. It made me accept the situation that I would eat anything afterwards. I still do. I never looked back in that direction. Also, that I mixed a hell of a lot better. There was a wide spectrum of people in that situation, all put into the one pot, all with the same, with the same ideal that the war for to be over and to get back to normality. And of course, for us, it was a time for preparing ourselves better for to come out and adjust to the situation that was going to happen after the war, because there was bound to be a boom period after when everything started getting back to normality. I went to courses over there, just learned a little bit, a hell of a lot more than I had before. And not that I had much going in, but I was the better of the whole exercise.
You returned to Bray then after 4 years in the Royal Air Force.
Right, yeah.
What did you do then?
I marked time for a while. I was offered my original job back at a much better rate of pay. I thought about it very strongly.
This was in McDermott's cinema?
Yeah, well, not in the same cinema, but in a cinema belonged to the same boss. It was the Star Cinema I mentioned earlier. And I thought about it and I said, well, this will put me back to square one. I said no. And although it hurt me a little bit at the time, I never regretted it, because it left me then that I was free to look for something else, which I had took up a few electrician's jobs and things like that, but eventually worked my way in and got into the post office engineering department in communications. I was at what we called an automatic telephone exchange engineer, but we weren't engineers really, we were more technicians. Maintain the exchanges, the equipment. Originally in Dublin Castle. From there I went on to Merrion Street, Merrion Buildings, which looked after government buildings. From there I came out to Bray for the opening of Bray in 1950.
But before that, as you were working in town, you had to commute every day. How did you do that?
Yeah, I cycled in and out. I was a very keen cyclist, and as I said, I was very keen on sports generally. I was keen on the cycling. Cycled in and loved cycling in and out. And I also was playing rugby for a team in town, Railway Union, which had their training pitch on the south side, they had the facilities of training, showers and all that sort of thing, which at the time was something which was very rare. Very rare. Out here there was very few places where you could train and have a shower afterwards.
How long would it take you to cycle from Dublin to Bray in those days?
Funnily enough, I used to make it in around about 50 minutes. 50 minutes was about the normal time to get in.
You said it was a boom period then. What were pay and conditions like in those days? Can you remember your wages, for example?
Yeah, well, exactly. My wages exactly were £4.19.
£4.19 shillings?
Shillings, yeah. And £4.19 shillings. So that was a fair amount. When you could believe that you would get a suit for about £4. A suit of clothes. And clothes generally were very cheap. You get a great pair of shoes then for £1 or so, Wonderful pair of leather shoes that last you for... My shoes often last me for anything up to 10 years.
In those days, not nowadays.
Yeah, well, I still get a long run out of them too, but clothes was relatively cheap, and as I said, I suppose top wages at the time were around about £8 a week. I remember being offered a job in Aer Lingus, and I had gone out there for a short while, and they sold the Constellation. They had Constellations which were flying the Atlantic, and because the government changed, and they decreed that they would have to sell those, and I was let go. And funnily enough, they had said to me when I was leaving, it was a case of last in, first out. So I got the job in the post office afterwards, and whilst I was in the post office, Aer Lingus began to literally take off again, and I was offered a job back because of my experience in the Air Force. I was mainly working on instruments, aircraft instruments, and I turned it down because I felt that in the telecommunications I would have a fair chance of getting out near home to work. and I couldn't see them moving Dublin Airport out to Bray, and I wasn't keen to leave Bray. I was very fond of living in Bray.
Well, that move did come about when you were asked to move to Bray for the opening of the telephone exchange. Yes. How many lines were there in the first exchange in Bray?
There's around about 700 lines in Bray. That we opened it in 1950. Jim Everett was the then Minister for Post and Telegraph. Being a Wicklow man, he was making a bit of a splash in the area, and this is why Bray got his telephone exchange in 1950. Early days now, and a very modern Strowger equipment type, Swedish equipment type of exchange, very much up to date. So much so that all the brass hats who came to visit Ireland in relation to telecommunications were shunted out to Bray and shown around this model exchange. It was very up to date, very modern.
Whereabouts in Bray was that?
It's in the very same position as it is now, beside the Queensbury Shopping Centre. It was a showpiece. It's extraordinary that the staff at the time was just two people, myself and one other person. The years were very kind to me in that exchange. Although I didn't take up employment totally there all the time, I was shunted back into Dublin after about 6 months, and then moved on a promotional basis to take up a post. Well, I took up a post in Bray for a while and went back then to take over Foxrock Exchange and Greystones Exchange, both telephone exchanges at the same time. And I was commuting between one or the other, which suited me fine because I love travel anyway. More often use the bike than anything else. First love, I think, is cycling. Photography, I was very keen on from a very early age, and it seemed to go hand in glove with the cycling, because you jumped on the bike, you got out in the Wicklow Hills, and you ran riot then with whatever camera money you could spend on film. I felt that this I really enjoyed this. I loved it out around the Wicklow Hills, and spent an awful lot of time out there. From my earliest days in the cinema, I was on the bike and I travelled. I was keen to travel. I remember getting on the bike and cycling down to Connemara. That was during the war, and I had a fortnight down to Connemara. Fabulous down there. And of course that was very rare because the roads were terrible at those times. I have since then never missed travelling somewhere every year. Went to Rome in 1950 on a motorbike over all the Alps. Did 3,000 miles on that trip, and hitchhiked and went every possible way around the continent. Enjoyed every minute of it. Loved travel.
In 1949 then you became a founder member of Bray Wheelers. Was there a big interest in forming a cycling club in Bray?
There was a fair interest, all right. There was a lot of people who flitted around on bikes, and they never seemed to get organised. And they called this meeting and they asked me, because they knew of my interest in the earlier years. I was always seen to be on the bike. And they invited me to get down to this meeting, and we went down and we formed the cycling club. And I said, strictly a touring club. And the idea was that I felt very strong about interesting the local kids of the area into enjoying the Wicklow environment, and we never looked back really. It was a fabulous idea. It took on right away. We formed the Wheelers in 49 and never looked back. And we joined the Anoiga and we toured, and then the Bray race started in 1951, the Circuit of Bray cycle race. And whilst I wasn't terribly interested initially, but somebody they taunted us because they said it was ridiculous that we had a cycling club in Bray and nobody in the cycle race. So we were goaded into action, and 3 of us started this racing section. It whittled down to 2 of us, myself and a great friend of mine, Rory Plunkett. We were the beginnings of the racing section of the Wheelers. Bought our Ganseys, as they were called then, in Clearys. They happened to be a purple colour. We were called the Aspro Wheelers because we looked like the packets of Aspros, the purple and white. The local Aspro pill was boxed in. Just the 2 of us. We were taunted all over the place. Everywhere we competed, here's the Bray Wheelers, all 2 of them. And we competed everywhere we could, and we did fairly well for ourselves at the time. Not we didn't break any world championships or records or anything like that, but we made a bit of a name for ourselves, and we began to grow during the 50s, and we're very fortunate with the membership.
But being a cyclist in those days was not without its problems as well. You weren't allowed to wear shorts around the town of Bray, for example.
Well, it wasn't the thing to be seen in shorts. I mean, you couldn't expose your knobbly knees in public without being scorned, and just as it was. A thing I noticed there recently, you were never to be seen. A man was never to be seen wheeling a pram. You just would be laughed out of the town if you were seen behind a pram, wheeling a pram. And the same thing applied to wearing shorts. He just didn't wear shorts. And I remember it was so, some people were very conscious of this whole thing. I remember even much later days now into the 60s. Well, yes, it was the 60s, when a young fella came down, and he happened to be the brother of Shay Elliott, the great professional cyclist, who was a member of the Wheelers. I went in and got him to join the club, and you wouldn't believe it, he wouldn't take his long trousers off. He rode all the early races in his long trousers. No way was he riding in shorts and be scorned by the public.
What about on the beach, though? I mean,
well, it was a different thing on the beach. You got into your shorts on the beach. You didn't move up onto the promenade proper. It was down on the beach, sand. That was it. Beyond that, you didn't go. We organised cycle races, 3 of them around the town, and there were the whole place would be thronged with people shouting us on, and it was great. It was great from a club point of view, and a great spectacle to watch the short little races. Very exciting, and there was always spills, and nobody really got hurt. Fellas fell around the place, but always great fun. Great. I remember even sprinting myself and Rory in the early days. We held sprints up on the promenade itself, on the prom. They closed the prom off and held sprints from the top of the prom to the bottom of the prom. They were great fun.
Has bicycle technology changed much over the years?
Oh, it's gone very professional. Even the young fellas now, we wouldn't know what it was to have a tracksuit or anything like that. We went into Cleary and bought a pair of long combs, the undervests, the long johns as we call them, and we dyed them black and wore them in the winter as tracksuits, and you just couldn't buy a tracksuit. You couldn't afford a tracksuit anyway. You just about had the price of a bicycle. But then again, you bought a bicycle for £20. That was a fully fledged racing cycle. That was great value. They held that value right up until almost the mid 60s, and they began to then escalate into astronomical figures. Now you're talking about a couple of £100 now, £300 or £400 for a good racing machine now.
In 1959, you got married to your wife Ronnie. How did you meet her?
Oh, Ronnie was a staunch member of the touring section of Bray Wheelers in the 50s. There was a tremendous touring section. We had anything up to 40 going out on the Wicklow Road to British Bay, to Arklow. We cycled everything up Strawberry Beds, down to Kildare. We cycled all over the place. Huge big tours. So much so there was a great regimentation about the whole thing. I was usually the captain up the very front with a whistle, and you had a vice captain and maybe more minders down the back to keep the whole echelon, peloton, if you like, all in formation. Great discipline about running that particular, very, very safety conscious, And she was one of the members, along with a lot of ladies. We had more ladies actually than men. Well, I don't know why, but it happened that way. We were always very fortunate with our members too. We've had a great esprit de corps in the club all down the years. We've some of our early members now. Some of them are with us 30 years, and have a great affiliation to the well-being of the club.
In 1964, then, you became a founder member of Bray Credit Union. How did the credit union start in Bray?
Well, we held a little meeting. I think it was in Fatima House down there by the railway station. There was about a dozen people showed up for this meeting. I remember we went around. Two of us went along from the Wheelers because we got a circular asking us would we attend this particular type of meeting. And I saw something which could benefit the club. Although we had our clubhouse up the Dargle Road, which was loaned to us free by a farmer in Little Bray who had great leanings in our direction. He gave us this little place, but I could see that we weren't going to have it forever, sort of thing. And I felt that we wanted a base and we wanted headquarters. And I could see the credit union was going to provide that facility whereby we might be able to build our own headquarters. And I went to this particular meeting with that in mind, not having the slightest intention of getting involved in credit union, because I felt that I was totally committed to the Wheelers. I was chairman, secretary and PRO of the Wheelers, and it was a full-time job apart from my work. Anyway, I went to this meeting in front of my house and we had exploratory talks about the whole thing. We came back to the second meeting and it was decided to form a credit union in Bray. And we were asked, would we contribute something towards the formation of it? So I could see that it was going to be a very fruitful organisation. And we all contributed. Some of us threw in £2 or £3 each into the kitty to get the fund rolling. Before I knew where I was on committee. It took off then because I had a fair amount of links with the population being local and with the Wheelers, and the fact that we were fairly prominent in those early years. We're now into the 60s. And I found myself acting as PRO for the credit union for the early days of credit union, which was rather crucial. But it certainly took off.
That was in 1964, and over the years you've been a founder member of so many organisations like the Bray Chess Club, the Bray Community Games, and County Wicklow PRO for 3 years of the Community Games.
That was tremendous lot of work, tremendous work in that.
How did you fit all the work in? I mean, you've so many organisations: the Shankill Basketball Club, Bray Junior Camera Club, Bray School Project.
Well, you see, it didn't take an awful lot of effort. It's like when you get a ball rolling, you see, it doesn't take an awful lot to keep it going. It's not tip now and again keeps the whole thing going, you know. And that's the way it really happened. I felt myself flitting from one thing to another and hitting it a thump. And then as it carried on over the hill or whatever, you find yourself going back to something else that was slowing down. You see, it's very easy to get involved when you make so many contacts. It's very simple to ring up. I mean, you must remember that I was in the communications business. I had phones at my disposal to ring anybody anywhere. I often held committee meetings over the phone in which I would ring all my pals on committee.
This was in lunchtime, of course.
Yeah. Well, on our off time, even if you finished you might have a committee meeting at 5 o'clock. We were finished between 5 and 6, more or less, you know. And overtime was a thing that was very rare at the time. And you could be mopping up between 5 and 6 sort of thing, killing time, if you like. I often held committee meetings without anybody having to leave wherever they were. You could get 6 people on the line and carry out a very fruitful meeting, and not taking half the amount of time we would to get to muster people together under the one roof.
Well, in 1977, you were a founder member of the Bray Cualann Historical Society. This was sort of like the pinnacle of an ongoing interest in folklore.
I had very little interest in local history up to then, and it happened through the Wheelers. And we had, in 66, we had built our clubhouse through the credit union. We borrowed from the credit union, we built our clubhouse, the members built the clubhouse, and we built the clubhouse for £200. Every club in the country uses our Wheelers clubhouse, and we're one of the few cycling clubs in the country who have our own headquarters and our own activities in the winter and that sort of thing. But I found in the 60s that we had dominated the Irish cycling scene so much that our top riders were almost professionals. They were so proficient and they had developed their own riding to such a degree that they were practically unbeatable. We won everything from 10 miles up to 100 miles. And out of the 15 classics In one season, we won 14 of them. And we won everything from Ross Talteen, Tours of Ireland, beat the even Irish national team one particular year. We beat them in 1970 with a club team, the Irish national team, and the Liverpool and the regional teams and teams from all over Ireland banded together, and we beat them all hands down and won not only the individual, we won the team award as well. And the whole thing was so professional like that the young members coming into the Wheelers couldn't bridge the gap. They found it very difficult to bridge the gap, and I saw the warning signs were there, and I said, "Look at lads, I'm not on committee, but I have to do something because it's disintegrating to the point where we've no new blood coming in. You can't blame them." So I decided that the clubhouse would have to be used at least 6 nights a week for any activity that would generate interest in the club itself. So we started off on a Monday night with table tennis, chess on a Tuesday night, keep fit on a Wednesday night, cycling on a Thursday night, and photography on a Friday night. And we ran those activities right through the year, and then we ran a disco once a fortnight on a Saturday night to bring all those particular sections together. And it worked like a charm. It worked. We ran that continually for 3 years.
You've been public relations officer for so many organisations. Why do you think you've warmed so well to that role?
Possibly it's from dealing with people who were having problems, and from a telephone point of view, I found myself talking to an awful lot of people and ironing out their problems to the best of my ability. And from what they've told me after I retired, I seem to have some flair for that side of it. That seemed to manifest itself in PRO work, that I seem to be able to judge people and get the best results of whatever they were looking to have ironed out from whatever way I approached it. I seem to enjoy it an awful lot too, and I got great job satisfaction from dealing with that sort of thing, you know. It worked tremendously with the Historical Society. It worked well with the Wheelers. It worked great with the community games, and it worked well in the job. And I found that I built up a credit rating which left me that anytime I was ever in a difficulty, whether it be finance for the Wheelers or whatever it might be, there was never any problems. I enjoyed meeting people and I enjoyed the job satisfaction. The thing about it is the new technology now has left it that isn't there anymore, and it's one of the reasons I was delighted when I could retire a bit early, because this type of facility of dealing with the public no longer exists. That was something that I would have missed, and I enjoyed talking to people. I enjoyed talking, as you can imagine, and it meant that I didn't have this job satisfaction. And when that was gone, I felt that it was time to get out and go out and meet the people who used to come down and see me. And this is where the folklore came in.
Tell me about the folklore then. What do you do?
Well, when I retired, I the first thing I was grab a tape recorder and head for the hills and meet all these people who used to come down, whom I thought were terribly interesting people. They were ordinary people. They were tradespeople. They were people who lived, we say, up in Lochdan, or lived in the mountains, and were farming people. They were every sort of people. They were tradesmen. There were people who were craftsmen, and people who were just ordinary people who were characters, if you like. In the last year, you wouldn't believe it, I made a point of any of these people who came down there, I made a point of asking them where they lived, what they did, and would they mind if I called up to see them and have a chat about life in general. And I had a list as long as my arm when I came out. I was armed completely for to go out and do this, simply because I had teed it up before. Talk about the parable of the unjust steward. Maybe I often smile when I thought of it. When I used to hear it at chapel, so that's a very good idea. So I think I'll go along with that one. They were all delighted to see me again, because they associated me as a fella who put things right when they were wrong, and that suited me fine, you know. I never drank, and I never found the occasion. I was sort of prompted to set an example, and drinking and smoking wasn't the kind of examples I should be showing to young kids who were just out of school and wanted to cycle and that sort of thing. Now, that isn't to say that I haven't been in every pub in the town. I have, because I enjoy talking to people. And when the first thing I walk into a pub, I say, right, set up a large whiskey. And he knows quite well I don't drink anyway, so there's usually a 7 Up that's set up. And then I suggest that now, where do you want a fight started or something like that. So I'm at home in a pub, even though I don't drink. It's a great place for yarns anyway, and lore generally. Although I couldn't say that I could go into a pub on a regular basis. I enjoy going in on occasions. Maybe I'll get around to taking a jar sometime.
Are you religious at all?
I say certain prayers, one of my own making. It's a prayer which is something that I feel it covers my little way of saying thanks for being able to participate in all these activities. And it's thank God for His mercy and goodness. Thank God for my work and my play. Thank God for my home and my family. Thank God for His wonderful way. That for me sums up all the things that I'm involved in, without being too religious. I could say that honesty might be my biggest drum that I beat, being honest. I can't stand dishonesty in any direction. And money, I've very little regard for money, very little value for it. I've never been short, and yet I constantly refuse money when I'm offered it. Boy, I don't know.
You've always lived in Bray. Have you ever wanted to live anywhere else?
I have so many roots here now that I doubt it'd be very difficult for me to pick them up and plant them somewhere else. The first thing I would lose was all the friends I have. You've only got to enter any of the organisation I've been involved in. You're talking about 20 or 30 friends in each, and maybe more, and in the Historical Society, and the Wheelers, so many down the years. You're talking about hundreds of people who've passed through the Wheelers since 1949, who are all still communicating with me or ringing me up or whatever it might be. Never lost a friend in any of those and organisations that I was involved in.
Have you any regrets, Joe?
Not really. I've enjoyed a great life, fabulous life. I'd live it all the same one again. Very fortunate with a fabulous family. Wife is a wonderful person. And the Historical Society and the cycling. I would regret that. I would have liked to have taken up local history about 400 years ago. I would know a hell of a lot more than I know now about it. But apart from that, no real regrets. I've had a wonderfully full life, and my reservoir of friends is what makes it all very much worthwhile, Fabulous.
You had a serious stroke in September of 1986. Did that surprise you and frighten you?
It was a stunning blow, really, because, as you know, I said about I didn't drink or smoke. I was meticulous about keeping fit. Well, not being fanatical now, but I could always say that my weight was either a pound up or a pound down. I knew exactly what my weight should be from the cycling and general athletics, and I knew that 9 stone 6 was my weight, and I could go to 9 stone 4 when I was absolutely fit. And that it wavered between 9 stone 4 and 9 stone 6, and that was something that I was fairly. I never went above that figure, and yet when this happened to me, this stroke happened to me, I had taken up golf only about 3 or 4 years ago, and I was enjoying every second of this thing because I didn't know anything about golf and didn't want to learn anything about golf, but I could get down to join Cualann Golf Club, which is way away down the south end of the county, exactly 50 miles from Bray. I enjoyed the drive down in the morning at 8 o'clock in the morning on Saturday morning. I was a once a week golfer. Drive down on Saturday morning. I'd play 18 holes in the morning, have a packed lunch, and play 18 holes in the afternoon. That was 36 holes of golf every Saturday, and could play more if I get an idiot to come out and play with me. But they were all falling around the ways, didn't want to know anything about golf. All they wanted to do was slide into the bar and forget about it. And I know that I was very fit. I remember a friend came back from America. I took him down for a game of golf. I said, do you play much golf? He says, I love golf. So you play anything? Play. So I must have wanted to play. We played 8 in the morning and had a packed lunch. Went out to play 8 in the afternoon. So you must have, how are you fixed now? So do you want to play? Oh, yeah, so we couldn't play a bit more. And anyway, we got as far as 42 holes. And he said, Joe, he says, I guess I'm running out of gasoline. So we came in after 42 holes. Now, that's how fit I was. But anyway, to get back to the stroke, I went to bed one night, having played golf for the weekend. I always was very religious about taking my wife out on a Sunday. Whatever she wanted to do on Sunday, we did it. And that was her day. We went over a drive and came back. And I woke up then the next morning. And I'm a very early waker, and an early riser. 7 o'clock was the normal. I'd get down and make a cup of tea and bring it up to her. I went to get out of bed and found that I was totally paralysed on the left-hand side, and I couldn't tell her. I had to wait till my son woke up to tell her that I was paralysed for a month. They told me I wouldn't walk again, but I fought that off. I think it was all the interest I had to come back to. Made me fight to get back on my feet again. I have a slight weakness now in the left arm, but I'm still doing all the things I ever did before I had the stroke. Thank God for that. A lot of prayers and a lot of people, a lot of friends prayed very hard for me. I was absolutely stunned by the amount of prayer that was showered upon me. I know very well a lot of people put me back on my feet. And there we are.
Listening back to Joe there, and you really get a sense of just how much of his own time and energy he poured into the community. He was a completely selfless character, and so much of what we take for granted in Bray's social and sporting fabric began with people like him. I remember I recorded that interview with Joe in his living room on Sea Point Road in Bray, and it was broadcast a few weeks later on BLB. And later Joe told me that it was emotional for him hearing it on air, so he listened upstairs while his wife listened alone downstairs. Joe passed away in 1999, leaving a massive void in the community. But his legacy is still incredibly visible all around us. Every summer, the Bray Wheelers continue to host the annual Joe Loughman Randonnée, keeping his memory alive on the Wicklow roads that he loved so much. And the Bray Credit Union, now rebranded as East Coast Credit Union, which he proudly helped found, stands as a lasting monument to his dedication to the everyday people of this town. Joe Loughman was a great storyteller, a passionate advocate for our local history, and above all, a true gentleman who left Bray a far better place than he found. There's more archive interviews available in this podcast series, so please like and follow us. And if you'd like to make contact, our email address is radiogenicproductions@gmail.com. Once again, from me, Mark Quinn, thanks for listening.